Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HL7 Open Source Tooling Series. The purpose of this series is to create awareness and highlight communities of practice for open, modifiable tooling that FHIR standards developers and implementers can adapt to their context. Through a cooperative agreement with the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy, a division of Health and Human Services, HL7 is hosting this open source tooling series. All sessions will be recorded and available to you to review and share with your colleagues from the homepage for this event. We'll share these recordings, slides, and any links there. We will take Q&A as we go. You can go ahead and put that in the Q&A box, and Brian will get to your questions as he is able. FHIR's open license, diverse community, and rapid adoption are laying a new foundation for interoperable digital health innovations. With so much happening across the FHIR community, it can be hard to keep up with all the recent developments. And so the open source software ecosystem for FHIR provides a rich starting point for organizations who may be new to the specification, those with limited resources, or those looking to build their solutions on community-driven applications. So we encourage you to check out all of the previous sessions. There's some really rich content out there. Today, we welcome Brian Postlethwaite, who's a senior software engineer from Microsoft and has also been part of the HL7 FHIR management group for several years and has contributed heavily to the specification. He's going to introduce to you this FHIRPath lab project. And so with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. And yeah, so today's session, we're going to go a bit about me, so that we have a bit of a background, the use cases of why we might want to have a look at the lab, the overview of the project itself, the FHIRPath testing, so questionnaire testing, some FHIR markup, FHIR mapping language testing, and just general Q&A. So speaking of, if there's issues and stuff that you wanted to have a look at or particular questions about what we're looking at, throw them into the questions and answer, and I'll see if we can grab them as we go along. So who am I? So I'm Brian Postlethwaite. As Sandy mentioned, I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. I'm in a division called Microsoft Research Health Futures, and we cover health standards and interop, getting tooling to help adopt FHIR and improve healthcare overall. So I've been involved. I had a bit of a look back and see where are we at. When did I get involved? And it's been over 10 years since I've been in the space. One of my areas of focus has been structured data capture. I've contributed reasonably heavily, I think, to the FHIR SDK over the years. And I'm a patient administration co-chair and on the FHIR management group. My term ends at the end of this year, so there are some vacant slots coming available. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, get involved, come to the meetings and see if you're interested. And there's a few places where you can connect up with me. So this is the obligatory open source slide for the project itself. So it's up on GitHub. The current iteration started back in 2022 when I was starting at Microsoft. I was looked at what am I going to present at Dev Days this year, and I thought I'll give some FHIRPath a bit of a run. And I'd previously had an open source FHIRPath tool that was Windows only, that was started way back in 2016, which was helping me just debug and try out expressions to see what the results were, because I was using them pretty heavily in SDC. And so I decided, let's try and take this out of the Windows environment to a web environment, because there are a few people with deployment issues. So there's a lot of you out there on Mac. And so we've now sort of grown and continued. It's a continuous deployment to prod and dev. I've got 2 environments it runs in. I'm the sole maintainer at this point, but have had contributions from quite a few others to integrate it in with others. All the source that it runs is open source, so you can get the transparency on what it does and use the different pieces in it to see how you can integrate the other parts into your own projects. So it's more a test tool for exploration rather than a certification style tool. It doesn't have any SLAs. And if you're looking to go and try out things, be aware of which version that you're actually looking at and how that relates to the version that you might be running in your environment. So whether you're using the FHIRPath JS JavaScript implementation or the FHIR SDKs implementation, or even the one with Java. And so of note with the Java, there's the current FHIRPath engine, which is what's typically available in the IG publisher, which is pretty close to right up to date, whereas the Happy project only rolls out a new version every 3 months or so. So you might be a little bit behind where the current is at any point in time. So just be aware of those sort of things. And yes, FHIRPath-lab.com, or the Deb site. So let's get cracking into it. So who would come to see the FHIRPath lab and for what sort of use cases? And one of the most common ones is creating and testing invariants in structure definitions. But we also have support for testing questionnaires because questionnaires are pretty heavy with FHIRPath expressions. Also, I've added support for structure maps, which is FHIR mapping language, and search parameters, locating contents based on a FHIRPath location returned in operation outcome. So whenever you do a validation or you get issues from an operation, you'll get operation outcome with a FHIRPath expression which describes the location of that error. So you can use this tool to go and find where is the element. So you've got a really large input object. Sometimes it can be hard to navigate down to that. And it's not that common, but I have found a couple of times where I've got this bit of JSON and I want to go and find where was the particular element in it based on the set of criteria. You can do that with the FHIRPath JS. It doesn't just have to be FHIR, which is kind of neat. And the other sort of part that's in there, I have an LLM or a capacity to BYO generative AI model to use to get assistance with FHIRPath expressions or questionnaires. That'll be quite fun in the area. So that sort of covers off what sort of things am I going to use it for, and where do I find FHIRPath expressions in the spec? We find them, in structure definitions for invariants, questionnaires, and there are other places as well. So what's the sort of overview? So the whole mission for, if you want to call it that, for the lab is to be the best tool to build, debug, and test FHIRPath expressions by allowing you to create, test, debug, and share. It's a website built with Vue.js and Nuxt and TypeScript. It's Azure hosted and has backend .NET and Java services. And I'm hoping that the demo gods are with me today. Have had a little bit of a hiccup with one of the services at the back end, but we'll see that at the end, whether that's actually all good. As I run through the application, I'd put up a quick user interface components. So these are the core parts of the application. So as we go through, I'll try and point these out and explain what they are as we go. So we have the toolbar, our search pages for each of the resource types that we've got there on the right, and a test facility, and our twin page tab control. So there's a familiar user experience right throughout, even though there's a few little oddities as you go through. And everything is driven through a settings page, which is defaulted in pretty much with this, except that you put your own name in rather than mine. And as I said, with the AI, it's a BYO model. So you can put in your OpenAI key or an Azure OpenAI key along with your Azure path, or you can use OLLAMA or any other OpenAI compatible generative AI solution. And where does all this sit? It sits in your browser local storage. So it's not actually storing any of this stuff, particularly your name, in the service, which is the FHIR server. And where does it pull the examples? So when you go and try to download content, if it's an example that you're using for testing content, you can download it straight from your sample. If you're wanting to read out structure definitions or search parameters from a live system, you can put in your own FHIR server here and then do the searching through the other pages. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the actual lab. And so we can see the actual website. And we can get in and we can say, well, let's have a look through the library to start off. And so with that, we can see we get a nice little search list where we can choose what we want to filter on. So we can filter in, we can say, I want to see the demonstrations, or I want to get in and say, I want to see anything that uses the FHIRPath combine function. So I've actually drawn in all of the test cases out of the FHIRPath testing scripts into the FHIR server as resources, library resources, and we can see the descriptions of those. It's a really neat way if you want to go and find an expression that uses a FHIRPath function, you can do that quickly. We can also then drill into those, and there's got the metadata and a little link down here, and then go through and debug this test expression. And here we find ourselves at the editing screen or the testing screen, which is also the same way that we can get to from the home screen. We can go straight to the tester page. So nice and straightforward to get in there. And we can see we have a context which it will perform the evaluation on. So this is also another FHIRPath expression, and the expression that we want to test against a specific test resource. We can also say patient/example, and we can go and download. And so that will download that specific resource. And we can see in the, and the joys of using a live environment. Someone's obviously been updating this, so we can go under for history because this is just the FHIR query. We can go and get out a specific version and then we can test with that. It looks like someone's had a great deal of fun with the happy server there. But here we go. So we can see here's Peter James Chalmers. So that looks pretty recent. And then we can run against different FHIRPath engines. So we've got our .NET engine, the Happy engine. Also, we note that there's FHIRPath's, the Python engine from Vita Software, and the AidBox engine from Health Samurai. And so it's simple enough to run. And of course, I've given an example that doesn't happen to run on that particular service. And then we see the version and of the library that's running. So if we call the different ones, we can see which version of each ends up getting called. And the Java one, that's the IBM one. And we come back. So we've walked into that. We can also find a trace capacity. So when we're debugging, we'll often want to know what at a particular point in the expression was being traced out. So if I remove this part and say I want to TR, and I can see I get that tooltip to try and help with the auto completion, which is really helpful. And this is given parts. We can run that. And so we can now see that as it evaluates through, it will put those in. And that works the same with the other engines as well. So which is really neat. We can also look at, so we looked at the test resource, looked at our trace. There's the AST, which is an abstract syntax tree, which allows you to actually see this particular expression all traced out. And when you're running it against the FHIR engine, it gives you those little target icons, which allows you to quickly navigate to those particular points. And I've got the same sort of capacity from the actual results. So it'll take you, so each name in that sample resource will be evaluated as a context and then provide the results for each of those contexts. So in this case, you can see there from that one, we get Peter James Windsor, which is the expression. From this one, we just get Jim, which is fine. And then we look at that. So if I go back even to an older version, we can run that. Sorry, we can download that resource, which brings us our Homer Simpson. We can run that and we can see now there's just the one and it's there. So it's not much of a thing that you see right now, but when you've got a really large resource and you're trying to find your way around parts of it, that can be a really big help to getting through there. Now, if I wanted to get some help with this expression, I've got a Z link up here for sharing to Zulip. And what that'll do, so when I copy that, I can then go over into the Zulip and I can type in and I can just paste. And because it's created a markdown, so saying this is markdown, it's of the language FHIRPath with our expression that we've got typed in that we've been working with. And then because it's markdown, it creates a link, a parameters link, with all of those parameters in it. So the content that I had here, it'll actually put into that link in there. So when I can come back here, I can now see it's nice and clean. I can click on the follow link and it will bring me into that same expression. So when you've got a problem with an expression that you've been experimenting with, it's very quick to actually click and get that content coming in. Right. So I won't post that, but that's how we get through there. Cool. And you might notice that there's a save button. So if you're having a play with this and you don't see the save button at the moment, go through the gear to find the settings and you can click on and put your name in here and then that will become available. Because when you create one, so I want to save this, then it'll actually open up the title so that you can give it a discount. So share this demo, experimental, and then you can say why you want to save it, and then that will go into the system. So live demo saving a selection or reference. Save. And so that stores it back in, and of course I'm doing something wrong. And so where that would go, it will be saved into this specific server. So yeah, Demo God's not being so happy at the moment. Okay, well, let's continue through. So that was a little bit of testing through the lab. So we saw our capacity for searching, looking up based on a function into the name. We saw the other search properties, navigating to and from, viewing the preview, and clicking the name to open. Also in there is, we saw the debug link, and we didn't look at the canonical URL. So when we came into here, we also found, so because this was a library that we opened, we also have the description of the library, which you saw me starting to save, and if there's any other publishing, so if it's been saved before, that information with the canonical, which can be very useful. Excellent. So the testing with the many engines. So we have the external engines highlighted. We have our quick share links, the expression editor. We saw the function autocomplete and the tooltips getting to the spec. So just a reminder on that. So we can see that it actually shows the name. And let's look at the combine. We can see what that is. .to string, and we get that. And we can also click straight through that link and it'll take you straight to the spec. So if you're sort of curious about a particular function, you can go to that particular function in the spec, which is a really useful capacity. And then through the AST, we also have the same capacity where you can link through from that too. So which is really neat. Cool. We saw the trace log variables we didn't go through. So we didn't have any variables at this point. So let's just add in a variable and we'll go %. And you can see that there's some built-in variables that you can just straight up use, or I can have just type in the name of my variable that I want to declare and that I'm using. And then we get our variables tab appears. So I don't clutter the user interface with components that are not required. And so instead of having to try and manually add in variables, you just use it and it automatically includes them in. And we can put in a value demo, and smile, it's working. And we can run that. And there we go. So we can see that those come through. And not only that, often with things like a subscriptions FHIRPath based trigger, you'll want to have a resource in there. So you'll have previous, and we can actually just type in patient/example. I can run that and I'll see, oh, it's just put out a string, but I've now got a download, so I can click the download. That reads that particular resource, and so we can see it's come from the Happy server that we were downloading. And now I can run it, and you can see that content's gone in. Meta, just to actually see something a little bit smaller. And we can also have encounter/example. Let's hope that's going to work. And meta, and run that. And there we go. So we can see that you can use expressions that have resources that come in. So it's a nice, easy way to actually test that content. So they're dynamic and they'll download. That's excellent. All right, so that's gone well. And we saw that there's our link to each of the expressions, and it's externally hosted, have the sort of the purple text and a little asterisk with the web icon. So that they go out because they're not running into the FHIRPath lab environment itself. So it actually goes into services hosted by those two organizations, or anywhere you'll see that color. And we wandered through, and yes, so that I didn't show either. So looking at these expressions, so if I had something that had Gibbons, so I had a typo and I run that, so I get no sort of feedback. There's nothing actually wrong with that. Why is it complaining here? Or it should be complaining, but I'm not getting the results I expect. But if I go and run that against the Filey engine, so my .NET engine has the FHIRPath validator bolted onto it. So it'll run the Filey engine will run the expression fine and not complain. but that service also has a validator that's also open source in the .NET stack that runs on that expression and tells you, givens does not exist on the human name. And so I can also look at the abstract syntax tree, and I should see at this point it says there's no return type calculated for givens. And so as it walks down, so we see we have the scope of patient, walks into the name, that can be an array of human names. We're going to select, and which has the scope of the human name, walks into the text. And so we actually can walk through an expression, seeing the data types as it processes, and we'll get to the point where it fails. And so if I do that and run it, we actually see a whole lot more errors because it wasn't able to work anything out even at the top. So that's super useful to actually work out where is an issue coming from. And if I look at this one, proving system equals, so that's a common one. I'll run that sort of expression. Let's just see if we can run that. And of course, I'm doing too much all at once. Yeah, so once again, the .NET stack has a validator which will help you understand whether you've got collections involved that are causing issues and work through them. So this was a recent, as in yesterday or today, depending where you are. It was trying to work out how can I take an expression like this and work out what's wrong with it. Why isn't it producing the results I expect? So I'll click on the test lab, which opens it up. And so that's the other really cool part, is when you're sharing it around, you can even throw them in slides to actually get your samples. And straight up, because I've run it against the FHIR engine or the .NET engine, it says, so this patient has a birth date and a birth date extension, and the invariant that we were trying to check starts off with value. Our value, if I go and look at the AST, it goes, that does not exist on date. So date is a primitive, but even FHIR primitives have value and an extension, but value is not the appropriate thing. The appropriate thing would be to use .getValue to get at that content. That's fairly new, and the engines don't all have that yet. And we could change that and just reduce it down. So like this, take those values out and then run that. And now we see we get some closer results to what's going on. And then we can switch over to the different engine. And cool, happy's running, good. And we can see there that this is the Java version. So previously this would have been saying the happy version that you're running with, but I've switched up to the latest version of the Java engine rather than the one that's in the happy engine, so I can be more up to date. And what ended up happening, so we want to trace out and say, well, what's going on at this point? Let's see. So we've got trace dot what was going in here. So this is existing value, run, trace. So that's kind of fair. We can see what's going on. Now, if I take out, so the main issue that was going on with this expression was it wouldn't work with an extension only, a data absent reason extension. And so if I run that and go, we still get our value, but our trace says null. So that was the actual source of the bug that we were trying to work around, because it shouldn't be null. So toString on a birth date that's just an extension should return no result set. So if I run that against FHIR, you'll get nothing. If I run that against there, you'll get nothing as well. So that's the primary issue that was going on with that. and then we work through to get to a final answer. But that was how we can use trace to actually debug and find out what's going on. So cool, getting help with FHIRPath. Go into the Zulip stream under FHIRPath. That's the best place to get help. If it's specific with the JavaScript engine, there's the FHIRPath JS line, should help there. And yes, share using the Z link, the Zulip specific link. This one, if it goes, the size goes over about 1K, they don't share as well. And one of the tips for getting around that is instead, patient/example, put in the resource that you're using as a download, and then the share link will go smaller because it will only be sharing the resource ID rather than the whole content. And you'll see that you get a modified as soon as you go and mess with that, and then it will try and share that whole block. So that's a good tip there. Cool. All right. So that's all the FHIRPath side of things. If people want to go back and try some other expressions for doing a search parameter, we can come back to that and have a look through that. But we'll dive in and look at questionnaires. So we can go to our tester for that. So to actually get at we can go home and go straight to form tester. So that's all the link was. So I've got a default questionnaire that I always open if you don't pass something through, and that is the bit of everything questionnaire. And so we can download that, and it shows where this specific resource is coming from. So note that this is the full URL rather than just the examples or the form server. So I'm pulling this from a secondary or tertiary server to go and read that in. Reads out the core details from it. I've got that capacity. We've got each of the context variables. So when you're going to use a questionnaire, you want to actually test out how does it render. And so then we can give it a value, some so that's cool. And we can see that response. And so we can, this is testing this specific renderer with this specific definition, and then show the response, shows that's the response that we entered into that specific renderer. And so if I go and look at this other LHC forms, so this is the CSIRO's rendering. So there's a NPM package for that. And there's also a similar NPM package for the LHC forms engine. And so we can put that in and say, yes. Data. And show that response. And so we can see we get a tag to say which one of the renderers it came from. We can also see that same data going back and forwards between the two engines. And so if I tip in between them, and we also have from there, we have a validate. And so we can validate that specific questionnaire and get, yep, that's excellent. And I can make something wrong with this. So let's say someone had accidentally put in a value code data type instead of a string. And then I'll try and validate that, which is using the Forms Labs engine. It now gives me this nice error message to say that that's quite invalid. Okay, so I'll scroll around a bit, and I have this debug section, which is where any of the outcomes get reported. And I can click from that. I can go straight from there, straight to that specific issue. Now, if there was also an issue with the type, so let's say this second one, instead of being a string, which is a text, let's say that was a date, and try and validate it. We now see that both of them are wrong. That was the text, not the type. So we can validate that. And so it validates that questionnaire against that particular item. Now, if I had something really wrong, like that, so there's a typo, which is a mistake in the definition, and we're trying to validate a questionnaire against that, we can say validate. It will still validate that questionnaire and definition together. And then we can look at that debug and we can say that needs a type. It doesn't have one. And also says that that's a types D, which is not included. So you can get validation on both sides. And we also have a capacity to validate just the definition itself, and it will complain directly at that. We can also do editing and reformat, and it goes and readjusts this. So I see a question, could the questionnaire tested be used for automated testing for questionnaire forms? I wouldn't be using the lab for that. The lab is using the open source validation engines. So I would be encouraging to integrate that into your automated environment. So the purpose of the questionnaire, the FHIRPath Labs questionnaire testing, is to actually drill in and exploratorily test with specific content. So that's what that is. Cool. So I hope that's answered the question. So yeah, we had the details. Once again, we have the context. So because these are references, I can click and yes, this is a live setup. So we can go _history /2. I wonder what the description was at that point in time. That's something. We can put in our encounter /example. And if I refresh that, that will go back and read whatever the patient is out of that specific encounter. In fact, is that even there? Yep. So we can get that. And then if I go back to the renderer and test data, show response, we can see that it's put those bits of information into that test, which make it nice to get at. So that's all very cool. He's just checking. Yep. All right. So next up, there's a few hidden features that are lurking below. So actually, probably the easier way. So I can go back to my expression sources and I can click to questionnaires. So this is accessing our Forms Lab server and reading the forms from that. We can look at our demonstrations. And we've got quite a few in there. And I'm going to look at extract demonstrations. Oh, we've got a nice collection that David Hay's been working on and some that I've been working on. And so I'll just pick one, say this one. And so you'll note there that up in the toolbar, sorry, in the address bar, it's actually just passed the address through. And so when this tester loads, you can create your own deep links into the site to get at your own questionnaire definitions. And so David's been doing that and launching his own questionnaire definitions from within. Yep. And so I noticed that it's included the extract capacity. So now if I go and put in some details, so Postlethwaite, Brian, add FHIRPath is my middle name, and that's usual. And I'm kind of young. Show that response and the extract capacity. So this is a new addition into the lab to interrogate and test out the FHIRPath, so SDC's extract capability. And that will call this particular engine with the parameters. So it passes through the questionnaire response that we just entered in. it passes through the questionnaire, which is one of the new parameters through, and gets back our nice little description. So Brian Postlethwaite. So even though we didn't have a question specifically for that, it used an expression to go and join them up, and then also our name and content. So really powerful capacity to do that. And what else did I have? So that's just a larger version. So we also see our pre-pop tab. So if your questionnaire happens to have the launch context, it will then show the pre-pop capacity. And we've also got some pre-population expressions to FHIR queries to load in some data. And then on some of the items, we'll find initial expressions to go and see those and then run that. So we can then go to our pre-pop tab and we will run that engine. And so it will look back at our example, so our context, and use that context to fill out our pre-population. So populate with this particular subject. And we pass through the patient. So that's the patient context. That's the practitioner being passed in, that patient conditions. And so we can see each of these things. He's got a very sore ear apparently, and quite a few allergies. And then once again, we can click on our extract side and run that, and we get a whole lot of errors. And so this is one that's been actively worked on. But yeah, so we can get the result, which is our transaction bundle with our patient and condition. So this has been going from a form definition with a context, testing the pre-pop, loading it into the questionnaire response, viewing that in whichever of the engines, and then running it back through the extract coming out. So it's a really good tool for checking through all of that capacity, which is good. So I will just get back to the slides and let's see how we went. So we saw our basic JSON editing, we saw reformatting, downloading, validating, resetting. We didn't do, but that is reset. Put everything back, not exactly the breakthrough. So metadata, the context, the renderings, and yes, we do have others coming through. There's aid box is coming. I wonder if I've got that up here. So yep, so this is my local build. So aidbox is working with me to get their rendering engine in there. So we can just put something in. So here's 42 for some reason. We can have a look at that. And so there's our 42 coming back out from their engine. And we can see here's our 42. So it's really a capacity for testing other components. So testing whether it's the questionnaires, renderers, validations, responses, pre-pops, extract. And yes, someone's asked, the FHIRPath lab has nothing to do with pathology or laboratory, correct. It's a lab for testing, testing resources. So that was kind of fun, but yes. Cool. And so there are a few others on the icons. So if your content happens to have the pre-pop, they will be displayed, extract. Once again, it doesn't show them unless your questionnaire has them. So if I go to a particular questionnaire, and so this one has some pre-pop in it. So if I grab our pre-pop extension block and go to one that doesn't have it, questionnaire, we can go to the top here. We can put in our extensions, which is now incorrect. Let's grab those. is in. Going to reformat it. And now all of a sudden our pre-pop tab has appeared because we just added that in. So it's about it, the UI will grow as your content appears. Cool. And we do have that AI chat that I sort of alluded to. So which questionnaire am I in? So we can switch sides. So I can put the left and the right in that tab pane. So if I wanted to have this on the left and keep that fixed, I can navigate through the other parts. If I wanted to have a full screen view, I can do that. And it will dynamically size based on what you've got. Yeah, if I go back to my lab and say something like update, so translate the labels into French. And so it sends that request off to the whichever engine, and in this case, it's the GPT-4o model. And you'll get back a result. And yes, AI generated content may be incorrect and can take a little while to do. And so that's okay. I don't know French very well, but let's see whether that's as a JSON diff. So see if it can produce that same thing as a JSON diff. So it can, sorry, JSON, should have said JSON patch. But yeah, it's worked out that I actually meant JSON patch. So that's kind of cool. And let's apply that change. And there we go, nom de famille. And so that's it's a pretty cool feature. Obviously your mileage may vary, or your models may vary. Use it, it can be quite interesting. We can also do things like create a new form with and you'll find some stuff there. All right, so we went through that. So FML testing, I'll just have a quick poke in here. So the FML test capacity, so is just going straight from, so Mapper engine. So it's got support for my engine and the Java engine. And so we get to paste our map in and we run that. We get our engine that was running. He closes his, and is the, no, that's not running. So that was the function that I knew the demo gods weren't enjoying. But we can put other content in, so the tutorials, so that there are FHIR tutorials, mapping tutorials, map tutorial, and you've got step 1, and we've got our map, so you can grab the maps from here. They also need logical models, which are in here. And so if I grab, so I've got some of these canned to run. So that's this specific one. And that needs a model, or the 2 logical models. So I can come into the models area. I can say, download these. So I've got a particular server where I've got these models stored. So IDs left and right in JSON. And so I can read those structure definitions down. The input resource that I'm going to get and post to it. So we can grab that from the demo. And it can be XML or JSON in this specific area because the engine is the one that processes it. And then we can run that. You can see there's our test. So pretty simple. And we get our output and we get our debug, which is what was sent and what came back. And the trace is the steps that evaluated along the way, all the friends that we made. So not particularly exciting, but that's what it is. So profiles, there was a couple of questions around profiles. So if I go to the profiles set, just to show that quickly, structure definitions, You can find your own profile. Won't go in there. I wonder if this is going to work. So you've got that. There's our expression. So I can click through the test to say that's the particular invariant or rule within it I want to check. And I can go download. And so that will, so there is no example under there. But that's a way you can get in and quickly find through those to go and check out. Okay, so back to here. So we had a quick look, testing, editing. So the particular deployment, so we have the browser where it runs. It's got our Vue.js and Nuxt front end, talks to the FHIRPath.js library, or the other questionnaire engines, talks out to Beta Software's Python FHIRPath engine, 8box's FHIRPath engine. As I said, that I don't provide an AI model. You reach out and you can figure your own in. And then there's a heap of services that run back in my Azure subscription for the lab. So the .NET projects run in scope. And then the Java ones also run in scope as well. So not too exciting. So, and then I'll jump back because we've got 8 minutes to go. Let's have a look at questions. If people wanted to ask questions, I'll take those now. So main purpose of FHIRPath in FHIR, it's an expression language for, it's just an expression language that where we use for either extracting information out of a FHIR resource, which could be a Boolean, so an invariant, it's expected to be a Boolean. If it's a search parameter, it needs to match up with whatever type of search parameter is. If it's a reference or a coding or a token, you need those. With FHIRPath expressions in questionnaires, it could be for evaluating complex things like BMI calculations, so height times weight squared and that sort of thing. And so that's where it is. I think we've gone through the use cases for those. Could the questionnaire test to be used for automating forms? I think I covered that quickly and said that I wouldn't be using it for automation. It's more for exploratory. And you should use the other components that it uses. So whether it's so I've got a .NET validator. So if we go back over here, all the GitHub code is up on the lab, and I have other projects. So in my FHIRNet web API, in the source, there's a structured data capture project, which has, the questionnaire response validator and the questionnaire validator. So that's where those things are. So that's what I would be running those in. The parsing and validating FHIRPath. So Graham does have a validator for FHIRPath in Java. It's pretty close to the capacity that mine's got, in that they also walk into the extension definitions. So if you've got extensions in there, it will actually understand the extension, resolve that, and go, okay, well, this can only be a string type of value. And so it doesn't go that when you walk into and check out and use this particular extension, it will know that's going to be a string. And so therefore it won't complain that it's getting a collection where you shouldn't have one. And yes, the IG publisher does validate those, and I've got an upload fig tool, shameless plug, and that does that sort of validation as well. Yes. So are there any JSON path to FHIRPath conversion helper utilities? the stuff that you saw me demo, that's coming straight out of the ChatGPT. So there was nothing special there. So it was producing just straight JSON path. And because it actually tags up the little markdown block with JSON patch, I know that I can use that and read it. So when I went into that sample, where was it? Oh, that's pretty neat. When you get an issue, it actually puts that issue into the chat, so you can come follow up, which is kind of neat. I won't go back any further on that. Thanks for the demo. If you want to validate your own data, so yes, please de-identify anything if you're going to test it. It's an open environment, particularly if you're going to test it with the external services, which are not mine as well, because I've got no visibility or any clue where those are going. If you use the FHIRPath JS engine, that's all in browser. So the only thing when you run a FHIRPath JS, it will ping the server just to say you evaluated a FHIRPath JS expression. It doesn't tell you what the expression was. It doesn't tell what the resource it ran was. It's just a straight counter to say, for my purposes, to know which engines are being used, and that's it. And yes, everyone, so yes, I do recommend running the online version. You could build and run it yourself, but that's cool. So I think that's covered the questions that were there. So yeah, if people wanted to ask further questions, grab me on Zulip is the best way. Yeah, follow my blog if you like. And please do go back to the SurveyMonkey and provide some feedback. And thank you for coming along and joining in.
Thank you so much, Brian. We will be sure to get these slides and the recording posted out to the website as soon as possible. As Brian said, we do collect and review all feedback from these sessions. So I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat so that it's at the top or bottom, whichever the case may be. And I thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.